Hello YouTube, my name is Daniel, and welcome to another edition of Education 180. You may be wondering why I'm sitting here making this YouTube video for you. Well, here's the deal. Today, we'll be talking about the 10th section in the Logical Reasoning module on identifying the conclusion. You may be wondering what identify the conclusion is. When you encounter a question of this type on the LSAT, you're going to encounter a passage that has a series of premises that will be linked together with the conclusion. The conclusion links the premises together to give you a final concluding thought and will be the main point of the passage, or in other words, the tour de force of the argument. Please take a moment to read through the following common question stems. Press pause, and when you are ready to continue, press play. We will continue. It is important to be aware of the topic of the argument. You must first determine which statements in the original passage form the topic of the argument. Pre-phrase an answer based upon this topic, and choose from among answer choices that address the topic of the argument. And as always, eliminate incorrect answers and identify the correct answer. Eliminate answer choices that contain information that is extraneous to the topic of the argument. The correct answer choice will neatly answer the question raised by the issue, in a manner that is very specific to the argument. Please take a moment to read through Conclusion Sample Question 1. Press pause, and when you are ready to continue, press play. We will continue. Let's take a look at the following question together. So it reads as follows. For the most part, advocates of recycling do not consider the economic realities of this activity. While it may be a lofty goal to save the Earth's resources, mankind may suffer as resources are not allocated to goals of greater importance, such as world hunger. I would doubt that recyclers could tell a starving child that the life of a tree was more important than hers. So let's break this down step by step. We'll start off with green. For the most part, here's the main point. Advocates of recycling do not consider the economic realities of this activity. So this is our first line. Here's the environmental advocates. And they do not consider the economic impact of recycling. Let's go on to the second part. While it may be a lofty goal to save the Earth's resources, mankind may suffer as resources are not allocated to goals of greater importance. And this is represented by this picture here, such as world hunger, and I would doubt that recyclers could tell a starving child that the life of a tree was more important than hers. So I'm just writing more important life for the tree and less important life for the child. So that's what the passage looks like. But let's try and identify the conclusion or the main point of the passage. In analyzing the paragraph, the main point that we could say is that recyclers may not be making the best use of their time, and they fail to see other activities that may also benefit the world. So as I read the passage, I identified the very first line as being the main point or the final conclusion of the argument, while the other sentences were just premises that were supporting the final conclusion. I'm just writing premises provide support for conclusion. First line. They also say they could be using the resources to make greater change about other activities of greater importance. So the first line is a conclusion, and everything else is dependent on the conclusion. In other words, it's providing that extra support as to why we should believe this conclusion. So in reading the question samples, A was the only choice that supported this conclusion. A is a statement that best speaks to the main idea because they are so focused on recycling, they lose perspective of other goals that are of greater importance. So A was a credited response. But for argument's sake, let's take a look at the other question choices, shall we? So we know that A was the correct response. Let's just read the final part of the question. Which of the following is the main point of the argument above? So we already predetermined that it's the first line. But let's take a look at B. We could better allocate our economic resources by feeding starving children. And as we said, the main conclusion is our first line. So this choice of starving children right here provides support for the conclusion. So this is a question choice that we can eliminate. C, world hunger is more important than saving trees. This again is supporting evidence that advocates do not consider the economic realities of recycling. So this is our final conclusion. And C said, world hunger is more important than saving trees. That was said, let's use black. Are not allocated to goals of great importance, such as saving trees. So this again provides support for the main conclusion. So let's get rid of C because it's incorrect. Let's take a look at D. Recyclers are not thoughtful. The passage, I don't believe it goes so far as to say that recyclers are not thoughtful. Perhaps that their recycling activities do not consider other more important goals, but I don't believe that the passage would go as so far as to say they're not thoughtful. I would consider that extreme language. So I would get rid of D. D is too extreme for this passage. E, we should allocate our resources more humanely. Well, again, the starving child argument is a premise for the conclusion. It's providing support that perhaps advocates of recycling do not consider the economic realities of the activity. So we can also eliminate E. And just to summarize, A was the correct answer choice, and we have the check mark over here. Let's take a look at another question, shall we? Please take a moment to read through conclusion sample question 2. Press pause, and when you are ready to continue, press play. We will continue. So, upon reading the paragraph, well, let's read it together first. So we are up here. At Acme Pharmaceutical Inc. last year, the average salary for chemists was $33,000 per annum, while the average salary for pharmacists was $44,000 per annum. The average annual salary for all Acme Pharmaceutical employees was $30,000. So after we read that paragraph, we can determine a few of the things. First off, the average salary for chemists was $33,000 per annum, and we write that down here. We can also determine that the average salary for pharmacists was $44,000, and we can write that down here. And we know the average annual salary for all the other Acme Pharmaceutical employees was $30,000 a year. And we write that down here. And we can immediately make the conclusion, after looking at the numbers, that the average salary is lower than the chemists and the pharmacists. The pharmacists make the most, the chemists make the second most, and everybody else makes the least. And we can also make the conclusion that there must be workers who are making below the average salary of the chemists, because $30,000 is the lowest of all three of the averages. So D is a credited response, but we will come back to that. Let's take a look at the question. So the last part of the question is right here, and I'll do it together. If the information above is correct, which one of the following conclusions can properly be drawn on the basis of it? So A is right here, and it reads as follows. There were more pharmacists at Acme Pharmaceutical than chemists last year. We can't come to this conclusion based on the average salary, because pharmacists make $44,000 a year and the average salary was $30,000. So if there were more pharmacists than chemists last year, you would tend to think that the average salary would be higher than the chemist's average salary. So we can't determine this for sure. So A is eliminated. B, at least one pharmacist earned more than the highest paid Acme Pharmaceutical chemist did last year. Again, this is possible, but just based on the numbers that we were given, we cannot determine this for sure. It could be, but we don't know, so we're going to get rid of B. Let's read C. There was no pharmacist at Acme Pharmaceutical last year who earned less than the average for a chemist. Again, this is something that could be true, but we have no information in this passage that would back this up. So we can't use this as a support for the following conclusion. We can't draw this information from what we've read in the passage. And D says, at least one, and that should be one. Let's add an E. At least one Acme Pharmaceutical employee earned less than the average for a chemist last year. And this one we can conclude is the correct answer. Let's take a look at the averages again. D is the only statement that immediately speaks to the conclusion. At least one Acme Pharmaceutical employee earned less than the average for a chemist last year, because we know that the average salary right here is $30,000, and the average salary for chemists is higher at $33,000. So we do know that at least one earned less than the average for a chemist last year. So D is our correct response. But just for argument's sake, let's take a look at E. E says at least one chemist earned less than the lowest paid Acme Pharmaceutical pharmacist did last year. Again, it's possible, but just given the averages and the numbers that we are given, we have no idea of determining if this one is true. So E can also be eliminated. We can only go by the information that we're given in the passage. So again, D was the correct response. We have a check mark over here. Once again, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like us on YouTube. And on behalf of Education 180, happy LSAT writing.